has found you at last.
Darkest Dungeon 2 is the newest game from Red Hook Studios and the obvious sequel to the occult-themed roguelike, Darkest Dungeon. The original Darkest Dungeon was made with a small team of only 5 people, but that game saw some great success, so now they're equipped with a team of 14 developers, and it definitely shows in the quality of this game, as it's been expanded upon in almost every way. Now, this game has been out for quite a while now in open beta, but I just wanted to wait for the full release because, quite frankly, I was just busy. And just to preface a little bit, I have not beaten this game, and quite frankly, I suck at it, much like I did with the first one. So this is based on about 15 hours of play, which really in the grand scheme isn't much at all, especially for how this game works, and I've only gotten past the first boss and reached the second with the usual results.
Death comes for the rich and poor alike.
So the original Darkest Dungeon has a unique 2D art style, and this game upgrades into a 3D style, which the switch from 2 to 3D does take a little adjustment overall, but I do feel like it's a true improvement. And they also did an amazing job at retaining the art style while upgrading to 3D. These creatures of the dark look more grisly and ghastly than they did before, and the bosses are even more grotesque and gruesome, and they still managed to keep that unique dark art style, which they did an amazing job. Also, the infamous narrator is back and once again brings that special tone while revealing his dark and twisted history while running commentary on your horrific quest.
And everywhere, unbridled consequence.
The combat has also returned and is very familiar if you played the original game, a lot of the skills actually being quite similar, and then instead of being gated by items, you can now choose different paths for your characters from the very start, changing their stats, altering their ability effects. It makes them play much more differently, which adds a great amount of variety to the game. Trinkets are still super important, are the best way to change your character and increase your stats, but they usually come at a price. While the combat is pretty similar to the original, I do feel like they changed the overall feel of combat. What I mean by this is one thing they've done is change the way healing works. So now you can only heal your characters when they're very low on health, usually about 50%. Because of this, combat feels much more quicker because it's attack and buff based instead of kind of being a more methodical approach. They've also changed the way you level up your characters completely. There is no more armor, weaponsmith, or campfire skills at all. Your weapons and armor are permanent now, and each combat skill only upgrades once during your campaign, which in order to get points to upgrade it, you have to complete quests and tasks upon your journey. So in order to unlock more combat skills, you actually need to progress your character's story, which is a big improvement. Before, the characters were all just kind of random versions of the same class, but now each character has a very unique backstory to them, which reveals their past through the memories and the shrines of reflection. And as you'd expect, these memories are dark reminders of these characters' past failures and why these characters have now become the jaded mercenaries that we see now. For example, you find out the man-at-arms is a general who basically just failed at being a leader and lost countless men.
A massacre. A complete and total failure of command.
And the grave robber killed her abusive husband and got a taste of murder and a life of thievery.
She listened, smirking, as his empty apologies came in desperate, choking gags.
Now, the overall main goal of this game is you want to reach the Dark Mountain and slay the dark evil that resides within. You reach this mountain through your Stagecoach, which you guide your Stagecoach by selecting the path of the fork, similar to what you would do in Slay the Spire, but because of how the coach moves, it makes it feel like the game's faster than it actually is, but you actually do have plenty of time to make decisions. At first, I didn't really enjoy the Stagecoach much at all because I enjoyed the slow dungeon crawling effect of the previous game, but it has grown on me a little bit, and once I realized I actually did still have time to make decisions, felt a little bit better. And you can also adjust your settings too, so that when you pull up your character sheets, it actually pauses the Stagecoach. And it does seem a little counterintuitive, but you actually want to crash into the debris in the Stagecoach because it can give you treasure, which, I don't know, just felt a little off. You also heal on the coach, so you don't have to worry about topping your characters off at the end of each fight, because you'll recover a little bit before you reach your next location, which is pretty useful since the way they changed healing, you're not going to really have the ability to top off your characters, because most of the time you can't heal unless they're at 50% health or lower. Like your party though, this coach needs to be maintained and managed and upgraded, and gives you unique abilities and buffs, as well as you have unique mechanics to it, such as your wheels and armor. If either of these wheels or armor breaks, it's going to force you into an emergency repairs encounter, which can be kind of troublesome because in this battle, one member is always having to repair the Stagecoach, so you're basically fighting with a limited party. So because your party's constantly on the move now, once you reach the end of a region defeating its boss, you then rest at an inn before you then decide which new region you're going to move into.
Rest now for a time.
These inns are where you can do big heals to your stress and health, but also where you buy provisions, upgrade your combat abilities, repair your stagecoach, equip new items, subscribe to this channel, and equip new items to your stagecoach. Now once you've completed all your purchases and upgrades in the inn, that's when you choose the new region you want to go to, and usually they're going to each have special effects and challenges to them, which there's going to be a goal in that region as well, which is going to give you different special rewards, so it adds great variety to the game because it kind of adds a random element to each region now.
That was never fought.
Also, before you depart, all your characters will meet in this almost wallpaper-like scene where you have a chance to engage in a very new important mechanic called the relationships. Your characters can now engage in relationships with each other, and it works kind of similar to the stress mechanic because these relationships can either be positive or negative. Positive relationships will give you buff or healing actions when specific characters use specific combat abilities. However, negative relationships can make the other characters more stressed, give them debuffs, and really if you get these, it's just a wrench in your run. These really can be game changers because the positive effects are super strong and you can even get free dodges and heals, and this just seems super vital once you get to the mountain or want to take on some of the bosses. So as you go through the regions, there's going to be various different stops you approach in your stagecoach, such as enemies, villagers who need help, treasure deposits, unique shops, most importantly monster den and creature lairs. These dens can offer amazing rewards, but as always in this game, things come at a very big price sometimes. These dens usually have you face waves of enemies with no breaks between them, while the lairs tend to have you fight through like a floored system, and you eventually can pull out after each fight, but you want to keep pushing through because you want that boss reward because it's very heavily rewarding. That said, these lair bosses are very challenging and, in my case anyway, demolish me the first time I fight them, usually because of lack of knowledge. As the narrator once said in the first game, overconfidence is a slow and insidious kill.
At last, the thing is finally passed on.
Knowledge and experience. Twin yardsticks of progress.
And in the first chapter you can avoid these, but once you beat that chapter, you actually have to start going to the lairs to collect the trophies because you need to offer it to the mountain once you get there. So you can't really ignore these foes and you have to engage with them.
All problems have their solutions, even the big ones.
Now since you no longer have the hamlet to be your world hub, once you fail or succeed in your run, you're going to go to the Altar of Hope, which is your metagame marketplace. And this is where you'll use all the candles you collected during your run and use them as currency. Now this Altar of Hope does strangely look like the hamlet though at some ports, so I'm sure there's a lore reason that will eventually be discovered as why it looks so similar. So this altar is where you get the permanent upgrades for each run, letting you unlock new items, new trinkets, new stagecoach parts, new pets, as well as upgrading your characters and even buying new skins for them. Also, if you succeed in a run, which is rare for me, you can upgrade these characters' memories, buffing them even further. However, once these buff characters die, they end up losing their memories, unfortunately.
Bask for a moment in the light of distant days.
Overall though, I think this game is a great upgrade upon the previous one. Darkest Dungeon was one of those perfect after work, late night decompress and chill out games for me. And that's kind of strange because it is all about stress and fiendish horrors and failure. In fact, the game even gives you a warning when you first start it up telling you that you're going to fail a lot, which I kind of just find funny. I think Darkest Dungeon 2 will be able to continue that for me, although it is more run-based instead of a long, drawn-out campaign, so it is much easier to do a quicker run, assuming that you don't get bad randoms or just completely get rolled right in the beginning. I think if you're a fan of roguelike management systems, this would be a great pickup, and if you love Lovecraftian horror and are a fan of that, then it's just icing on the cake. There are a few drawbacks here, however, as I can feel it can be really overwhelming at first. And with all the different menus and options and different buffs and everything, it can just be super intimidated. They even give you a little cheat sheet, and even with that I still felt kind of lost. And while it did grow on me a little bit, I still really don't know how I feel about the Stagecoach. Sure, it looks exciting, but I feel like I would have rather just had a menu where I can just pick which way I want to go, instead of having this little bumper cart mini game in the middle. Yeah, it kind of makes the game feel more fast-paced and lets you get involved in the atmosphere more, but I feel like there could have just been other ways to do that. I don't know. The roguelike elements of this game are also much more different now. It's more of a metagame progression base with quick runs as opposed to the previous game where you set out on a much more longer drawn-out campaign. The last game felt more like an XCOM roguelike where you manage a squad over time, and this feels more akin to something like Hades where you try a few new things, get a couple permanent buffs, and hope your luck is on your side for your quick little run. Overall, I think this is a good game, and I'm going to give it a 7.5. The new roguelike style does make it feel like a completely different game, but I just love the aesthetic art style of this game, and I enjoy the combat and management systems. That said, I don't feel a need to grind this game endlessly and reach the end as fast as possible, even more so since there's something big on the horizon. I think over time I will eventually sink hundreds of hours into this game, and while this game has turned itself into a more quick-based run system, I feel like in real life I'm going to take this game kind of slow and methodically play through it. I will still enjoy doing runs when I just want to chill out and turn my brain off and go on a dark, twisted ride.
Take this. It is hope. The very last of it. It is yours now. You were bold once. Be bold once more.